Well, I can just refer back.
You like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like I said, sometimes I'll walk, sometimes I'll be asking questions of people, so.
Yeah. Well, we just walk all over here. Just so thank you so much. I just thought maybe that would be easy to, and I think that like he does everything to readjust for you.
I'll do a Q&A afterward. See what people have questions on.
Okay. If you need anything else, just let me know.
Absolutely.
Good afternoon. I am so glad to see all of you here. I'm Jean Gore, and I am co-president of the United Women in Faith, along with Karen Stacy, my sister-in-law. We keep this in the family, sitting right there with the shawl on. We are privileged this afternoon to have a man that Karen and I met while we were at a meeting for Regional Victim Crisis Center training. I can't remember now. We were taking some kind of training. We even got a certificate for it. And we had the pleasure of, where is he? There he is. We had the pleasure of being seated at the same table as David Wall and visited with him and all. And he told us some fascinating stories about things he's done, things he's working on, things he wants to do in the future. So as Karen and I were leaving the meeting, we looked at each other and almost simultaneous said, we have got to get him to come and speak to our group. So he is here today. Dr. David Wall is an assistant professor of sociology and criminology at McMurry University. He's a social psychologist and a board-certified sexologist. He received his PhD in sociology with a PhD minor in women's and gender studies from Iowa State University in 2020 with his dissertation, Speaking Through the Silence, Narratives, Interaction, and the rest of this isn't printed. What's the rest of your?
Constructional sexual selfhood.
Okay, constructional sexual selfhood. It didn't print on here. Sorry. So, without further ado, Dr. Wall.
No. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Those also in the virtual environment that are joining us today. Today we'll be talking about one of the focuses of my teaching and my research, that of human trafficking. As noted, I am at McMurry University as an assistant professor. Teach at that intersection of sociology and criminology. And my focus in both my research and in teaching is on human sexuality, sex and gender, human trafficking, and domestic and sexual violence. Some of the things I'm working on right now in my research include, this summer, in fact, I'll be spending time in Montana studying MMIW instances on tribal land. MMIW is missing and murdered indigenous women. And there is a connection here between those instances and sex trafficking. I also started a study in Cuba right before the pandemic hit, and so I'm hoping soon to be able to return to Cuba and study human trafficking in Cuba. Also, I was asked several years ago by the Iowa Department of Justice to do a study in Mitchellville. There's a women's prison there, where they believe that a lot of the women that are incarcerated are actually victims of human trafficking. So they wanted me to do a study there. Now, there's a lot of red tape and politics about going in and doing studies in the prison system, so they've been working for years on getting me in there, and hopefully one day soon that will occur. And then I'm currently researching and writing a book on sex trafficking in the adult film industry. Before I get started, I do have to give a trigger warning to anyone listening online or here. Some of the material I'm going to be talking about is horrifying, but these are things that we have to talk about. We can't just sweep these things under the rug, because when we do, we perpetuate the problems. So just a heads up that some of this material is going to be a little rough. All right, now it's time for audience participation. You ready? Has anyone seen this movie? Taken? Okay, it's about sex trafficking. Okay, what were your thoughts on seeing this? Did it seem realistic to you? Did it terrify you? Yeah, it is a scary movie. The thing to note about the movie Taken, and quite often when I do talk about trafficking, people keep bringing this movie up. Oh, have you seen Taken? Yes, I have. This is Hollywoodized. Trafficking is not like this. Not that, the idea that someone will just break into your apartment that you don't know and take you, or someone will drive up in a van and just grab you off the street. That tends not to be how trafficking occurs. And so this movie is always held up as one of those instances in Hollywood that actually harm those of us who are talking about trafficking, because it is an unrealistic view of trafficking. In fact, quite often, the victim knows their trafficker beforehand, and we'll be talking about that. All right, next question. Does human trafficking happen in our fantastic town here of Abilene, Texas? Yes, it does. All kinds of trafficking happen in Abilene, Texas. There are instances. I've only been a member of the community for 7 months, and in my research, I've uncovered many instances of human trafficking here. In fact, we had one that was just reported not very long ago in the news. In fact, it went to national news. Anyone know what I'm talking about? The Noodle Bar. Yeah, Fun Noodle. Fun Noodle has been charged, allegedly, the owner, with labor trafficking. So yeah, it does happen here. And it's not just labor trafficking that happens here. I've already uncovered several instances of sex trafficking in Abilene. This affects every community in one way or the other. So you can't think that these are things that happen elsewhere. They don't affect us. They affect all of us. All right, let's get some definitions here. So human trafficking, by definition, just so we're all on the same page, is recruitment, harboring, transporting, obtaining, or maintaining of a person by means of force, fraud, or coercion for purposes of servitude, debt bondage, slavery, or participation in the sex trade. It occurs when a trafficker takes any one of the actions, then employs the means of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of compelling the victim to provide commercial sex, labor, and or services. And quite often we use the AMP model to demonstrate this. So A is action, that inducement, the recruitment, harboring, transporting, obtaining. By means such as force, fraud, coercion, and for the purpose of commercial sex, as in the case of sex trafficking, or labor and services, as in the case of labor trafficking. And we can see how this plays out. You have to have the victims, those who are being bought and sold for profit. Then you have to have the trafficker, those who are obtaining the victims and exploiting them for revenues from the third component, the buyer, who supplies the market with the finances. So all three of these have to be included in the trafficking model. There's also a multitude of types of trafficking. And so looking at just a few of those categories now, we have debt bondage, which includes persons being held in servitude until a debt is paid off. And the structure of the debt makes it impossible to pay off, holding that person into servitude indefinitely. So in other words, they may say, you can leave once the debt is paid off, but is that debt ever truly paid off? No, the debt keeps accruing far faster than the payoff would be. There's chattel slavery. These are persons being bought and sold as commodities themselves. We have forced marriages. These are young girls and women forced into marriage against their will. We have forced labor, a person being forced to work against their will and without compensation. And then involuntary domestic servitude. These are instances where the laborer is manipulated or coerced into working, but they believe that they could do otherwise, that they could leave if they wanted to, that they could quit and go elsewhere, but only when they attempt to leave do they actually find out that they're held there. There we go. We have organ trafficking. This is where organs become a commodity for medically fragile patients. We have slavery by descent, persons being born into socially constructed class. This is along the lines of a caste system. And we have child trafficking, displacing a child for the purpose of economic exploitation. In many areas of the world, we have what we call child soldiering. This is especially prominent in developing nations where there are rebel forces. Children are taken from their homes or sold by their parents to be soldiers, put into military action. And the one that is my primary focus when it comes to human trafficking is sex trafficking, which is defined as the use of force, fraud, or coercion of a person for a commercial sex act. So, some numbers here. There are 21 million victims of global trafficking globally. It is 150 billion, that's billion with a B, dollar industry worldwide. Out of that 150 billion, 99 billion, so the largest piece of the pie, is generated from sex trafficking alone. Sex trafficking is the most prominent form of human trafficking. So 55% of all trafficking victims and 98% of sex trafficking victims are women and girls. It's a disproportionate amount. So in terms of other forms of trafficking, human trafficking is second only to drug trafficking as the most profitable form of a transactional crime. And only 5% of trafficking cases are ever reported. So think about this. 5% are reported. Our numbers can be as low as 5% that we get. That means we have 95% unaccounted for. All right, a few other facts. The hours of 3 to 6 p.m. and 4 to 8 a.m. are the most common times that trafficking occurs. Now, most people, when I ask, they say late at night, around bar close or after bars close is the time that trafficking usually occurs, and that's not true. It's these hours of 3 to 6 in the afternoon and early in the morning from 4 to 8. Why do you think these hours in particular?
Leaving or coming to work.
That's it. Leaving or coming to work. People will, once they get off of work, they will partake in this, or they will leave early and do it before they go to work. It is during those pre and post work hours that most trafficking interactions occur. As far as getting away from their traffickers, yes, victims of trafficking do get away from their traffickers, but they tend to come back. And they come back on the average of 6 to 8 times. The reason for this is because there's something that their trafficker has on them. Some traffickers, for instance, will get their victims, will control them by getting them hooked on drugs. All right, so they get away from their trafficker and suddenly find out, hey, they have this addiction, but they don't have the resources to buy drugs, but their trafficker supplies them, so they'll go back. Or they'll get away and realize they have no resources. They don't have a place to live. They don't have any money. Their family, perhaps, now wants nothing to do with them. Their friend base is gone. Suddenly they don't have the resources. They're not getting the food, the clothing, the shelter that was provided by their trafficker, so they will go back. So on the average, victims do go back to their trafficker at the rate of 6 to 8 times before they finally get away. The average number of customers that a sex trafficked victim sees in a day is 15. Think about this. They are being forced into sexual activity an average of 15 times every day. And that's an average. It can be more than that. It can be a little less than that. 46% of trafficking victims know their trafficker. It is acquaintance, someone that they're comfortable with. Just in 2018, prior to the pandemic, there were 5,147 cases of human trafficking reported in just the first half. Of that 5,147, 3,718 were sex trafficking. And remember, we're looking at possibly 5% being reported here. Out of those, there were 2,900 adult victims, 1,399 minor victims, and then 848 age unknown victims. So next question, what do you think are the top venues for trafficking? Super Bowl. Very good. It's not one of the top, but sports events are big when it comes to trafficking. Huh? Just a second. On the Super Bowl, Minneapolis had the Super Bowl a few years ago. They busted a very large sex trafficking ring outside of that. The bigger the event, the more instances of trafficking there are, quite often in tailgating. I came down here from Iowa, and the big rivalry there is Iowa State versus University of Iowa. They are constantly catching sex trafficking at the tailgating outside those games. The bigger the sports event, the more instances of trafficking have been found. Where else? What are some other venues? Bars. Bars not quite as often as you would think. Let's look at some of them. Massage parlors are big. You hear quite often massage parlors being busted for this. We had a few years ago a major story down from Florida where Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots, was busted in a sex trafficking massage parlor that was fronting trafficking. Resident-based commercial sex, hotels and motels, anything in the venue of pornography. And then online ads are big. When I first started studying human trafficking, it's when I started my PhD program at Iowa State University. And I was told that In Little Ames, Iowa, there's a lot of instances of sex trafficking, and I didn't believe it. How is this even possible? So I did my research, and that research included one night going onto the dark web to see what was out there, going online, finding out what was available. I could, within a couple minutes, I found that I could have had anything sent to my hotel. I didn't. I want to make that very clear to everyone. But I found out I could have. And it was very easy. It was very quick. So what does a trafficker look like? Are we thinking of the shady person under the street lamp with the trench coat and the collar pulled up? Most people do. Most people do. But we actually find out that the average range here, not necessarily the youngest age frame. It's that 30 to 50 years of age. 66 or 67% of traffickers were white. 66% had children of their own. In fact, almost half of them had children that were girls. And yet, in their profession, shall we say, they're trafficking young girls. 52% were married, so a majority are married. They have families. 72% had college degrees. We're not looking necessarily at the college drop or the high school dropout. We're looking at people with not only college degrees, but advanced degrees as well, PhDs, master's degrees, professional degrees. 81% did not have a previous criminal history. So it's not like this was the end result of a long string of crimes that they'd been committing. 61% admitted to buying sex before they became a trafficker. So when we saw that model, sometimes those buyers become the traffickers. There's also an increase in female traffickers. It's about 50-50 now. It's not just men trafficking. It's women trafficking as well. And so there's the real scary part. Anyone can be a trafficker. It's not the lowest edge of your community. It can be the pillars of your community. It can be the judges, the lawyers, the politicians. It can be anyone. And a lot of these people, if you don't think that they could possibly be a trafficker, that's how they can go under the radar. All right, so let's look at a victim now. Pregnant women and LGBT plus youth have higher rates of exploitation. Traffickers can make the most money from these two groups. Why pregnant women? Okay, they can't get pregnant, yeah. I'm telling you now, traffickers wouldn't care if they did for this reason. Yeah, it's the real horror. Hang on. Hang on to something. Traffickers see this as a 2-for-1. If they traffic a pregnant woman when she gives birth, now they have 2 victims. They see it as a 2-for-1. Quite often, they're recruited from strip malls. I say recruited, not pull up in the white van and just grab them. This isn't taken. They're recruited from strip malls, massage parlors, nail salons, restaurants. Malls are big. Schools, campuses have a lot of people on campus pretending to be students in order to get victims. Sporting events, which we brought up, state fairs, social media is a big recruitment ground right now. Youth in the foster care system are at risk for being victims. I've spoken with many directors of foster care places, and they say it's constantly on their mind because traffickers will come into the foster care system looking for victims. Note, they're looking for who they see as being vulnerable. So the age range of victims is 3 months to 72 years old. Do they traffic babies? Yes, they do. Babies are sex trafficked. Up to 72 years old. They keep to themselves. Quite often the victims will keep to themselves. They tend to dress nicely. They're not wearing rags. They're usually with their trafficker, or the trafficker is very nearby. It's part of the controlling part of it. They're there watching. They may also have tattoos that show ownership. Traffickers will put tattoos on their victims to show other traffickers that, no, this one is mine. So they don't try to work in on someone else's territory. It's very much like branding cattle at that point.
Is it true that they tattoo barcodes on
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Is it true that they tattoo barcodes on someone?
Yes, barcodes can be one of those tattoos. They tend to be vulnerable, young in age. They may have mental health issues. They may be addicted to drugs, poverty. They may be immigrants, new to the United States. Like I said, if the trafficker views someone as being potentially vulnerable, they will prey upon them. So again, and this is the really scary part, anybody can be a trafficking victim. Just as anyone can be a trafficker, anyone can be a victim of trafficking. So how is someone trafficked? Well, the trafficker is not always a very mean, horrible person. They will offer care and support and love, and they'll share common interests with their victim, and they'll provide companionship. They will also promise money, fame, high-profile jobs in film, in the fashion industry, in modeling, on television. The study I'm doing right now on sex trafficking in the adult film industry deals directly with this. A lot of these, I'm going to use quotation marks here, agents will find someone and say, hey, I can get you in a blockbuster movie. I can get you in Steven Spielberg's next movie. All you have to do is make a couple of these other type of movies first, because what's going to happen is some big Hollywood director is going to see these pornographic films, and they're going to say, I want them in my next movie. Is this true? No. No. Steven Spielberg is not looking for cast members by watching adult films. Simply isn't. In fact, think about the director or the producer of these blockbuster films. If the people that are in adult films are highly stigmatized, would you want to risk your multi-million-dollar movie to stigmatization and bad press? No, it's the big lie that adult films are a stepping stone to blockbuster films. But agents use that. It's part of their recruitment technique. Trafficker uses other victims in order to lure in new victims. So we saw the statistic earlier that a sex trafficking victim sees clients up to, on average, 15 times a day. Okay, a trafficker might say, you know what? I'm going to give you a week off if you bring me 3 new recruits. Or I'll drop that down to maybe 3 times a day if you bring me 4 new recruits. So it incentivizes victims to bring in more victims. The trafficker will dress and act in the manner of their prey. This is especially true at schools, whether it's high school or college campuses. They will pretend to be students and befriend someone. You know, let's go out to some parties. Let's do this. Hey, and then pretty soon it builds up until that person's being trafficked. The trafficker will offer not only love and companionship, but they will make a family structure out of all this. We are a family. And they'll go as far as to say, we are your only family. Because now, look at what you've done. Your other family, your old family, they're not going to want you anymore. Your friends, why are they going to want you anymore? We're your family. So you're beholden unto us as part of a family structure. And in sex trafficking, the trafficker will also glamorize sex work. Now, how does the trafficker control? Well, through mental and physical manipulation and outright abuse. There'll be threats. Oh, you want to leave? Okay, I know where your family lives. If I can't find you, I know where your family lives. I know where your friends live. I will go after them. They will misrepresent U.S. laws and human rights, especially when it comes to immigration. They will promise, hey, I can get you your papers. I can get you citizenship. All you have to do is come work for me. They will tell them they can leave when their debts are paid off, and as we've already discussed, the accumulation of debts far exceeds any debt that would be paid off. And they'll also move their victims around so they're alienated to their community, they're disoriented. This is certainly true of immigrants. They will use drugs to control their victims. They will often get them hooked on drugs so that they have to keep coming back for that supply of drugs because now they have an addiction where they did not before. They will use language barriers against them, again, quite often with immigration. And there's that idea of shaming of the victim. No one's going to want you. You're used up. Look what you've been doing for the last year. Who's going to want you? No one. We do. We're your family. So there's lots of laws and legislation that have come out. When I was in Iowa, they were working quite a bit on all this. But it wasn't until, it seems like there should have been laws and legislation on this for hundreds of years, you would hope. But no, they're pretty recent. It wasn't until 2000 that the U.S. Recognized human trafficking and passed the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. It was only in 2005 that human trafficking became a federal offense in the state of Iowa. And Iowa was one of the states that were at the front of the movement. 2012, the federal government made human trafficking one of the top 5 law enforcement priorities. Do the math. It's only been a decade. 2015, human trafficking classified as a forcible felony in the state of Iowa. Trafficker and buyer, for the first time, are charged the same and face the same sentence. So it doesn't matter if you traffic or if you buy, the penalty is the same. Buying sex with an adult in Iowa is considered to be an aggravated misdemeanor, punishable with a fine of up to 2 years in prison. And there's no statute of limitations on human trafficking. That means if someone was trafficked 20 years ago, well before any of this, it doesn't matter. No statute of limitation. What about the state of Texas here? Well, we have trafficking listed under Section 20A.02 of the Texas Penal Code, SB 20, making it a second-degree felony with a maximum fine of $10,000 and up to 20 years in prison. It's a first-degree felony if trafficking victim is a minor or if the offense results in the death of the victim. And it was updated just recently in 2019 to include the required registration as a sex offender. So you have to be on the sex offender registry now in Texas in cases of sex trafficking. So the big question, what can be done? And crickets. It's difficult, isn't it? How do we fight against this? Especially when only 5% of cases are ever being reported, right? Well, awareness. Awareness is the key to all of this. Awareness and communication. That's why I'm up here. That's why I'm talking about this. That's why I'm letting people know that this is happening in all communities. This is why I let people know how to be aware of these things and not just look at it in a very narrow focus. thinking that it's only this type of a person that can be a trafficker, or it's only this type of a person that can be a victim. But understanding some of those dynamics that play a part in trafficking in order to be more aware and maybe able to see when it's happening, sometimes right under your nose. And there's lots you can do. And I'm more than happy to give out this information to anyone that wants it. We have the National Human Trafficking Resource Center hotline at 888-373-7888. I always ask everyone to put this in their phone. It's an easy way. You're not going to remember this number when you see something. You're in a mall. You think you see something that's a little strange. What was that number? Bam, I have it in my phone. The Polaris Project Be Free text line. You can text HELP to 233-733. There's a live chat that I can give you the links to. There's an online submission tip to Trafficking Resource Center. Right here in the great state of Texas, we have the Texas Human Trafficking Hotline. That's 512-463-1646. Or you can email humantrafficking@oag.texas.org. Or gov, sorry. Don't do org. It's gov. But the thing is, you can always simply call 911. And they will connect you to where you need to make the report. If you're in the, like I said, if you're in a mall, you see something wrong, you're suspecting something, get on your phone and call 911. If something seems wrong, and this is the important point, if something seems wrong, it may be, it may not be, but isn't it better to be safe than sorry? If you're wrong, it's going to be checked out. If there's not a problem, no harm done. But if there is a problem, and you didn't say something, you just perpetuated it and kept the victimized for another day. It perpetuates this. Or, if there is something wrong, guess what? You just saved someone. Talked about RVCC earlier, Regional Victim Crisis Center, which is a fantastic organization here in Abilene, Texas. I encourage you, if you're not familiar with RVCC, get familiar with RVCC. And they talk a lot about the bystander and the importance of the bystander in putting a stop to this. The slogan is, I see, I think, I act. You're at Super Bowl. You think you see something. Say something. Because you might be saving a trafficking victim. With that, I thank you for your time, for your invitation, and I'll take any questions you have. Yeah.
Well, in the news lately, there's been all this comment about children who have been trafficked through the immigration system. The kids that came in without a sponsor or a parent or whatever, and they're finding all of this. Thoughts on this and how this happens?
Again, these are trafficking victims preying upon people they see as vulnerable individuals. Oh, yes, wondering, I'm sorry, I forgot about our online environment. Yes, wondering about the children coming over that are being exploited, that don't necessarily have sponsors coming into this country. And again, there are traffickers that are looking for this because they're exploiting what they see as vulnerability. And so that is definitely a case. They're bringing them in. It's not only for sex trafficking, it's for labor trafficking. It's all these forms of trafficking that we're talking about.
How does, I'm having a hard time understanding when you're saying anybody can be a trafficker.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're kind of enslaving someone somewhere, and you're nearby, or you're saying they're almost always with the trafficker, it seems almost like it has to be a network of traffickers. I mean, it doesn't just seem like anybody, any everyday person could be doing that and connecting with buyers without a network or something.
They have employers. or
employees.
They might have a second in command. Let's say, and I'm not casting any aspersions on politicians here, but let's say there's a politician. Obviously, the politician is not sitting down at ground zero with this, but they have employees that are carrying out the day-to-day business. But the trafficker at the head of everything might be a politician, might be a judge, might be something like this. We have caught high-profile people trafficking. Jeffrey Epstein case had someone that was working for him, Giselle Maxwell. This would have been a case of that. Now, Epstein is a little different. Epstein was also ground zero as well, but did have employees that would carry out day-to-day operations. So multi-million-dollar billionaire. I can't remember if he was a billionaire or not, but it's not the person necessarily in the trench coat under the street lamp in the corner saying, "Hey," it can be anyone.
Can you share a little bit about what's going on here in Emily?
I can't because I have to process all my research through my IRB, and I want it all analyzed properly and ethically before I put that out, but it will be available very, very soon. I will absolutely keep you posted. In fact, it will be a series of articles when that comes out. Right now I'm just finishing, hopefully by this summer, finishing on sex trafficking in the adult film industry. And a lot of that's coming from Texas. We're not talking just California and Florida, we're talking Texas too.
What's the most blatant observation that we ought to be aware of as we're out and about in the world? Something that's obvious that maybe we pick up the phone and call.
If you see active control of someone, if you're seeing someone who has who could be a trafficker with them, trying to control them, and like Harley said, those barcode tattoos, something like that. If any of these things that I've talked about, if it just seems like someone's trying to control someone, if it seems like someone's trying to recruit someone in some of these ways that I've talked about, say something to somebody. It's not always easy to see, but with more and more awareness, we can pick up on it a lot easier than we have in the past, or by not talking about it and by not spreading the word about how this is. If you think that it's done in the way that Taken depicts it, we've already lost the battle. There's going to be a lot of trafficking going on under the radar. If you think, well, but they didn't break into anyone's apartment and just take them. They didn't pull up the white van and just grab them off the street, so it must not be trafficking. It's so rare that anything like that happens that's not even in our field of view when we look at this.
How often is it family members who traffic their own children?
Yes, so how often is it that family members will traffic their own children? I see a lot of this on the international stage where they will sell their own children to make money. They will either sell their children to traffickers for the upfront money, or they will traffic the children themselves. We see this not just with sex trafficking, we see this definitely with child soldiering, even labor trafficking, forcing their children to work in squalid conditions for 20 hours a day. We see this with the sweatshop environments.
Well, my son, as a cop in Oklahoma, in a small town area, surrounded by fields, had mentioned to me that they suddenly realized that a lot of those fields have been sold to Chinese interests, and they're seeing more and more that they're indentured labor.
Yeah, so rural areas are fantastic places for traffickers to hide out. We have this problem in Iowa because Iowa is one of the ground zeros for human trafficking because it has an interstate system, a very good interstate system, north-south, east-to-west, so traffic, and it's a square state, and it's a small state, so if traffickers need to get over the border quickly, it's very easy to get over the border. It's also heavily rural. There's lots of places to hide in Iowa where people are not going to suspect that trafficking is going on. They can hide away. I talked about how traffickers will alienate their victims from the community. Rural areas is a very good way to do this. Keep them disoriented to where they are. Well, that's it. I'm always available. If you have any questions, if you want to know anything about human trafficking, I talk about this stuff all the time. I present the work that I've had in a myriad of fashions. You can always get a hold of me at McMurray University. My office door is always open to people that want to talk about this because I see it as part of my responsibility to providing awareness and communication to my community where this is going on, to keep as many people safe as possible, to get as many traffickers off the street as possible, and to rescue as many of those traffic victims as I possibly can. So contact me anytime. I have an open door policy. And I thank you, and I appreciate the invitation today.
Well, this is a token of appreciation for you spending your afternoon with us. We appreciate you coming.
everything.
There are some more refreshments.